I'm about to undertake my biggest ranking ever, because not only am I about to rank every single one of the 50 Ninjago mechs, but I'm about to attempt to do it all in one video. So let's not waste any time and get right into it. But in case you haven't seen some of my previous rankings before, I do need to go over the rules. So first off, price will not matter on this list. This is because there are sets like the Titan Mech Battle, which includes 2 mechs at a $70 price, so it's not fair to judge them individually as a $70 set compared to an actual singular $70 mech. This is also the same with smaller mechs that are side builds to larger sets like temples. Speaking of which, not all side builds will be included. If the side build is a significant enough build, I will include it on the list, but stuff like Zane's weaponized chair or my personal favorite goated skeleton mech will not be included. And lastly, stuff like polybags, junior sets, and anything that isn't really a normal Ninjago set will not be included. Jay's Mech Battle Pack is actually a set I like a lot, but the reason I like it is because of the price and the amount of minifigures you get, and this list is not about the set as a whole, it's just about the mech. And even though this mech is good for its size and the amount of pieces it has, the other mechs are just better. This is the first side build mech, but it's actually pretty solid. It has good articulation, the actual build looks pretty good and very complete, and it's even got a nice shoulder mounted shooter. But let's be real, this is just a pretty small and overall limited mech, even though it is solid. This is one I like a lot more now than when it came out, mainly because of the uniqueness of its design. It's obviously small, but it has a lot of detail from the shaping of the legs, the way the cockpit wraps around the minifigure, and it's even got the ability to add some of the accessories from the jet up on the top of it. If this set were made today, it would probably just end up as another Evo style mech, which is why I think the uniqueness of this design has aged so well. Speaking of Evo mechs, this is one I really don't like that much. Fundamentally speaking, all of the Evo mechs are good in terms of articulation and stability, and they honestly don't look that bad either, but it just feels ultra generic. It's got all the basic Evo mech pieces used in the same basic way, but hey look, we got some swords on the back now. Like I said, this set, it's fine for what it is, but even compared to other mechs, this one's really just kind of boring. This is now the second time that I have talked about Shen's chair mech in a video, which is 2 more times than I ever thought I would ever talk about this set, but you know what, that's okay, because I actually love this thing, because it's just hilarious. It's literally just a dinosaur mech with an oversized chair and spring-loaded shooters, which is totally ridiculous, but it's also just really fun. More Evo mechs. This one, I don't really feel like I have to say that much. It's essentially the same as the other Kai and Lloyd Evo mechs, but it has slightly better colors and a little bit more details that make me like it just a little more than the other ones. Once again though, perfectly fine for what it is, but just kind of generic. Now this one is the other half of the Lloyd Evo mech set, but it has the opposite approach. It has a custom cockpit build which I think looks good, it's got the rice hat on top, and it's got some spikes scattered throughout for the bone aesthetic. Again, fundamentally speaking, this is the same as the other Evo mechs, but it's trying to be different, which makes it stand out more from the others, which is something I really do appreciate. The Wolf Warrior mech is another simple but cool design. It carries the dark blue and azure mix from the minifigures, and it combines it with this overall linky design, which allows for some really cool poses and a nice contrast with the elemental ninja mechs. This is a case where I feel like less is more, because there's really not that much to this mech, but it's also still very cool for what it is. Aaron's mech is basically an Evo mech, but it's a little bulked up and it's got some cool things going on, like this dragon jaw being used as armor. It also does have the ability to combine with the larger Lloyd mech, which is something. But for the purpose of this video, we're going to keep those 2 mechs separate and we're just going to count them as individuals. And this one is definitely the worst of the 2, although technically speaking, it's really not bad. A long time ago, I made a video about how much I do not like this set, and my thoughts have not changed. The idea of this set is that it's supposed to be an amalgamation of just scraps thrown together to form this mech, which is why this set has a bunch of asymmetricality, and a lot of the colors can be, you know, kind of all over the place. And I will say, the look of the set actually has grown on me a little bit over the years, but only a little bit. Even still, this set just does so many things bad on a fundamental level. It's the first mech to have these pre-bent squatting on the toilet knee designs, which literally always suck both in terms of appearance and actual functionality, because the legs are literally just stuck in this neutral position because of the way the knee is bent. The arms, they have this black slope piece which really restricts the posability because not only does it block the arms from going across the body, but it also makes it so this mech can't properly reach forward and it's always gotta be on this weird 45-degree angle, which is hilarious considering both of the arms have some sort of shooter. But there are some cool things here like the shaping of the cockpit, the removable jet on the back, the epic skateboard for Ronin, and just the overall creativity of this design. But the execution of the idea here is just not very well done. This is another set that I have been a long time hater of, but I really only dislike this one because of the color scheme. If this was basically exactly the same set, but instead of having these awful dark blue and olive green highlights, if it just had trans purple species scattered throughout, which is closer to the appearance of the show, I would probably like this set a whole lot more. But unfortunately, we have this version of the set, which is just awful. The Piranha Mech is one of the weirder Ninjago mechs, but I think it's mostly good. The one thing that holds this back is that the legs really don't have any posability, and while it's pretty obvious that the reason that was done was to increase the stability of this set, it does kind of suck because this mech doesn't exactly have arms, so the only real mobility here is the jaw. But even that is kind of weird because the jaw also doubles as a cockpit. See, the idea of a biting motion when there's already a guy in the mech, it's just kind of strange. Even still, this is a fun mech, although it is a little bit limited. This to me is just about the perfect $10 mech. The Evo system really does shine at this scale on pretty much every level. It looks good, the articulation is good enough for a set of this size, and the only real issue that I have with it is that because the weapons are a sword and a saw, the inability to move the arms across the chest is pretty annoying. But otherwise, I do really actually like this set. The Legacy Samurai Mech is one that I think is extremely underrated. I think this set is incredibly good for its size, and I think the design is actually really cool, managing to fit in a lot of small details and callbacks to the original set. The posability here is great as well, but I'm not going to pretend that this is better than the original set by any means, but if you just look at the set for what it is instead of comparing it to the other version, it is actually a very good small mech set. I hated this mech when it first came out, but looking back on it, it's actually pretty solid. My number one issue with this one is the legs. It has the stupid pre-bent squatting on the toilet design, which I hate, but it's not that bad at the smaller scale, which is what this set is really treading on the line of. The real issue here is the ankles, which have extremely limited movement forward and back, and that combined with the pre-bent knees makes it so the legs are mostly stuck in this one position, which was easily avoidable from a design perspective. The rest of the build though is actually really good. My favorite part is the sword, which not only looks cool and works great as a weapon, but when you store it on the back, it changes the look of the mech as a whole, which I think is really cool. I also really like the way the cockpit was built, and the shoulder armor is kind of reminiscent of the original Samurai Mech. So yeah, the legs definitely not great, but the rest of this mech is. The Empress Mech is similar to the Pixel Mech, but I think it's just a little bit better. It's got the really cool steampunk aesthetic throughout, it has a really cool sword and claw, and the articulation is great everywhere, including the knees. The only reason this isn't the perfect mid-sized mech build is because for some reason they made the feet uneven, so the actual toe part sticks up a little bit higher than the heel, and that actually does make the stability of this mech pretty bad, especially compared to every other Ninjago mech which just has normal flat feet. I would say this is one of the weirder mechs LEGO has done, but that's also part of the reason why I do really like it. It has a unique way of capturing the intimidating presence while also giving off the feeling of being a legendary figure. As far as the functions here, it really doesn't do much. It's got one spring-loaded shooter and the legs move, but you know, they're a little bit awkward because it's this sort of tripod design. But again, I do think this is super cool for what it is. I really have no problem putting this decently high. Now, despite what some may believe, this is the first Ninjago mech that was ever made, and it was honestly really solid for its time. It's got some cool things like the hands that can actually grab onto minifigures, it's got these flick fire missiles, but then outside of that, this is a pretty standard mech. I do think the number one thing that would have improved this set is if they made the snake head somewhat smaller, because it is just so massive compared to the rest of this mech that it makes the proportions of it feel a little bit awkward, and it did make it have some stability issues. But overall, this is still a pretty good one and definitely a worthy first edition. The Garmadon is in many ways the opposite of the Hfmasters mech. The head build and the overall shark section of this mech looks really good, and it has honestly no stability issues, and it does have cool functions like the opening and closing jaw, but that's it. I don't love the design of the legs because it's a super obvious exposure of Technic pieces, and even though I do like the mechanical aesthetic seen in the feet builds, I don't think it carries particularly well throughout the whole set. But my main gripe on this one is the posability. Even though the set is stable, I wouldn't exactly call it posable because there's really only two things you can do here. You can have the legs in this neutral position, or you can have one leg back in this walking pose. Anything else in this mech is immediately going to fall over. And while I wouldn't say it's horrible posability, it's enough to make the legs annoying to use, which really isn't the case with most other Ninjago mechs. The original Cole rebooted mech is simple, but it is good. The best thing about this build is the use of the CCBS pieces for the arms and legs. These pieces make it so you can pretty much easily put the mech in any pose you want without having to worry about any stability issues whatsoever, and they do it without taking away from the design, especially on the legs where they use the shell piece to bulk it up. For a mech this small, it manages to do just so much very well, especially considering this was not actually the main build of its set. Lloyd's Elemental Power Mech is the first of the elemental mechs to show up on this list, and it is my least favorite of the bunch. I would say it's the weird design out of the four for a couple of reasons. First off, it has two different sized swords, which even though it doesn't really matter, I don't understand why they did that. It's like they came up with two different designs and then they forgot to swap one out for the actual official release. The legs, they're also a little bit weird because the ball joint faces backwards, which can kind of tend to lead to some weird poses. But the number one reason that I think this set is weird is that even though it's a Lloyd mech, it has a samurai aesthetic. And I don't think that actually looks bad, but it's also not exactly fitting for Lloyd. It also has these dark red pieces scattered throughout, which I do think is bad because it doesn't really go that well with the green. Now in the past I have speculated that this might be because the set was originally designed to be a Nia mech, because the red and samurai aesthetics do make a lot more sense in that context, but ultimately this is released as a Lloyd set, and I don't think as a Lloyd set it's that great. Lloyd's Hydra mech is yet another really weird Lloyd mech, but this one I do like a lot more. This one is only weird because of the asymmetricality of the build, but at the same time, the asymmetricality is what makes this set what it is. The helicopter piece being used as a shoulder pauldron is one of the coolest things on this mech, but it's also one of the worst because it is so oversized that it makes the claw arm a little bit awkward to move. The Legacy Boulder Blaster windshield piece being used for the cockpit here is also really cool as well, and honestly I think the only real issue with this set is the way the arms are attached. They have this Technic hinge build for the arms instead of a mixel ball joint, which even though it does work, it's super easy to accidentally disconnect the arm when just trying to pose this set, which is honestly just not great design. The rest of the set is really cool though, and honestly the only way I think this set was gonna get better is just by being a bigger set. When this first came out, it was easily one of the 5 best Ninjago mechs ever made, maybe even in the top 3, but compared to today's standards, it's just not even close. It's still got fundamentally great stuff in it, like the waist articulation, which I think was a super smart thing to include in a set like this, because the way the swords are connected on the underside of the arms instead of in the actual hand, it makes slashing this set super fun and easy to do. I also do think the overall look of it is good for its size, but once again, when you compare this to some of the sets we get today, it's just not at that level. The Firestone mech is a set that was almost great. The idea of a mech being half fire and half earth is something that I was really looking forward to because LEGO has done it in the past and it was really good in past sets, and to be fair, I actually do think it looks good here as well, In fact, I actually think on the surface, this set is pretty good because the torso section looks great. It can actually fit both Kai and Cole at the same time, which is awesome. The arms look really cool, and just from a distance, the set does look good. But then you get a little bit closer and you see the legs and the whole thing just falls apart because once again, for some reason, they decided to go with the god-awful pre-bent knees, which not only makes it look like the set is fighting for its life on the toilet, but it also makes it so the legs are completely useless because it forces the entire weight of the mech onto the ankles, so they have this ultra stability built in, and they only have about 1 centimeter of flexibility before this mech completely falls over. It also doesn't help that LEGO displayed a prototype version of this set at the LEGO house, which had a normal leg design, so now we know that at one point this set was gonna have normal legs, but they just inexplicably changed it to this garbage.
We were on the verge of greatness. We were this close.
Now, for those of you who have been watching my channel for the last year, it should come as no surprise that I do not like this mech. The one nice thing I'll say about it is that it has all these great points of articulation with the knees, the waist, overall great movement in the arms, but here's the thing. Just because it has those points of articulation doesn't mean that they are useful. The arms have these stupid oversized Technic panels that always get in the way whenever you want to move the arms, and the worst part is, not only do these things constantly restrict posability, they don't even look good. It makes it just look like this thing has a poncho on. The ankles, they have no ability to move forward and back, so even though you can move the knees, there's no good way to stably plant the foot behind it. Now, I will give some credit here because the feet actually have these sloped diamond pieces on the front, and it is slightly better at balancing the weight from bending the knees than most big mechs are. But even still, this foot design is not good. I hear all the time, oh, did you know it's actually good because it's meant to look like sandals? I know it's supposed to look like the sandals, but they're not a stable foot design. The mech falls over because the foot does not have enough contact with the ground. So even though it looks like the thing it wants to look like, it is not practical for a set of this size. I also really do not like the color scheme on this set. The one thing that I find absolutely hilarious about this mech is that for some reason it has like 50 shades of brown. The feet are the regular dark brown, the legs are tan, and the poncho is this lighter burnt orange brown. It's not really that bad in person, but it's such a weird design choice. And I've talked about this before, but I have to bring it up again because to this day, I am still getting comments about this set being Kitangu reincarnated. And as a Bionicle fan, this set is nothing like Kitangu. Only the head looks like Kitangu. Literally nothing else about this set is like Kitangu. The set is so much closer to being like the Golden Mech than it ever will be to being like Kitangu, and everyone just ignores it because, oh, you know, the head kind of looks similar, even though the other 90% of the set is nothing like it at all. Okay, now we're getting back on track here. It should come as no surprise to most of you that I absolutely love the Final Battle Fire Mech. It is such a simple but unique build, and it is easily one of the best $10 sets of all time. I think the best way to really show just how awesome this mech is to really just simply put it side by side with other smaller mechs. It is so much different from those sets, and yet it is so much better. The small details like the swords on the top and these gold flame detailings on the stickers, it helps push the design, but my number one favorite thing about this set is that it uses the elemental blade as its weapon instead of just one of the normal mech sword pieces. Now, technically speaking, it probably would have been better if they just used a normal sword because the elemental blade piece does fall off all the time because it's not exactly the most secure connection in the world. But I don't care, man. It's just such a cool integration of the collectible. Speaking of the final battle, the original Golden Mech is another one that I really like. There's nothing spectacular about it, but it's just a set that happens to do everything really well, and I also happen to think it looks really cool. I actually think this version of the Golden Mech actually looks better than the Legacy set, even though obviously I think the Legacy version is an overall better mech. But even though this did get improved upon, I think this original version still does hold up. Sora's Elemental Tech Mech has the smoothest and sleekest design of all the elemental mechs, which gives it a really nice appearance that I do enjoy, but it's also the most annoying one to use. The skirt pieces get caught on the legs, which is always a little awkward to move, but another thing about this that's really annoying is that it has no elbows. And obviously none of these elemental mechs have elbows, but it's especially bad here because Sora's weapons are a saw and this double blade, both of which are ideal to slash rather than move up and down, and the only way you can do that with this is the waist articulation, which even though it is a good substitute, it's not ideal for a smaller mech like this, even though this is still a very cool set. Kai's mech has the same issues with the no elbows, but like I said, I don't think it's as bad here because this makes more sense as it has a sword to move up and down. As for the design, I'd say this is the most complete looking of all the mechs. It's very well covered and the pieces are angled in a way so that they blend together, which does really help the shaping, but like I said before, I don't really like the color scheme of this set, or more accurately, the lack of a color scheme, because there's just way too much red here, and even though the mech has great shaping, all of the armor pieces are the same color, so it blends in and the details become less noticeable, especially when you put it next to the other mechs. Back to back to back, we have my favorite elemental mech. Now these sets are basically the same at their core, so I'm just going to talk about the things I like here. I really like the bulky aesthetic of this one, especially in the torso and the arms, and I especially love the little bits of trans orange scattered throughout. Obviously, the forearms have trans orange, which looks really good, but there's also smaller details like in the torso, which really do add a lot even though they are subtle. The set also does have a really nice foot build, which is super stable and easy for posing, and then of course it is worth mentioning that this is shorter than the other mechs, which personally I do like the taller look better, but the short in height here does help this one stand out. This to me is one of the most underrated mech sets of all time. It's just got so much going for it, like the double stud shooters on the hand, the giant sword, these cool blades on the back, and the fact that this can be rebuilt into a jet. But I will say for the purposes of this video, we're only going to focus on the mech build. I also do really like the way that this set integrated the whole Prime Empire aesthetic with the transparent pieces mixed throughout, and the way the health bars on the minifigure actually stick above the mech as if they're for the mech itself. Personally, I think the reason more people don't talk about this one is because it came out around the same time as some much larger and, let's face it, much better mechs, but this is still a really cool one. The Electro Mech is basically the original mech jet. It still has the double stud shooters on the one hand, it has the sword on the other, it has the blades on the back, and it's basically the same size and scale. But I do think this one is just a little bit better, and there's two main reasons for that. Number one is that the blades on the back actually work as a function where you push this pin up and both of them splay out, which is pretty cool, but the set also uses this CCBS bone for the upper arms instead of the mixel ball joints, which are a lot more stable and make this set that much easier to play with without any real detractions. The Legacy Thunder Raider mech feels like the next step of both the Electro Mech and the mech jet. It's similar in size and feel, but it's got a little bit more to it. The best part for me is the legs, which look really good and add knee articulation, as well as the overall torso design with the really cool cockpit and shoulder pauldrons. The only thing here that I think isn't good is the way they did the upper arms. Like Lloyd's Hydromech, instead of a CCBS or a mixel ball joint, they went with this weird Technic joint build, which is super easy to accidentally disconnect, which can be very annoying. Otherwise though, this mech is great. I wasn't sure whether or not to include this one because it is a part of a larger mech, but the design is so good I felt like I had to. It's honestly crazy how a mech that's designed to fold up and combine with other builds managed to be so good on its own. It's honestly good enough to the point that I feel like they could sell it individually and no one would complain. The only real issue here once again is that it has the dumb Technic arms that I really don't like, but everything else that you could consider a flaw I think are completely justified in this set for the combination feature, and they're honestly kinda nitpicky to begin with. The Ghost Samurai mech has definitely stood the test of time. The most striking thing about this set is obviously the forearms, which even though it's no longer the only Ninjago mech to do a forearm mech design, I still think it does it the best. The CCBS ball joints do help, but it really comes down to the precise spacing of the design, which allows each arm to move around without constantly being in the way of the other ones or looking awkward. It also does help that I really like the color scheme of the Ghost vehicles, with the dark blue and spring green. It's super unique and also just really cool. It also doesn't hurt that this set is based off the original Samurai mech, which is another set that I love, but this set is still creative enough on its own that it's clearly its own thing. Speaking of creative, this has to be the most creative design LEGO has ever done for a mech because of the transformation feature. This set straight up has the ability to turn into a bike without having to do any real disassembly, which is such an insane feature and honestly crazy they managed to design it so well. Now before, I did not count the 2-in-1 feature for Kai's mech jet because that's 2 separate builds and you have to take the entire set apart to turn it from a mech into the jet. But here, since this is a completely built-in feature, I see no reason why it shouldn't count. But even ignoring the bike form, this is still a really good mech. I love Sora's color scheme, and this being the first ever Sora set does help this mech stand out because there's just not a lot of sets that look like it. But even outside of the colors, this is still a completely different design from any other Ninjago mech. The cockpit having that slight rake forward looks really good. Even the wheels look good in the mech form, which is honestly not something they have always been able to do. The only reason I think anyone dislikes this set is the price, but price doesn't matter on this list, and this mech is great. And now we're really starting to get into the big ones. The Dawn of Iron Doom is a set that a ton of people love because it just looks so cool, and I mostly agree with that. The look of this mech is in fact awesome. The idea of a giant armored snake is one that I really like, and it's also something that I'm honestly surprised didn't happen earlier. I also really love the way that this set factors into the story with the giant rotating clock in the middle and the 4 spots for the time blades. Sets that integrate the collectibles and story elements like this is always something that I find really cool. But I do have one problem with the set, and that is the arms. On the top of the arms, they use this slope piece on the bottom half, which always bumps into the gray pieces on the side of the torso, which makes it so the arms can't really reach forward. Now I really don't know why the designers didn't fix this because literally all they needed to do was just swap out one piece, but unfortunately they did not, which makes this set really good on display, but not great in playability. This is probably one of the more disappointing Ninjago movie sets just because it feels like it's the one that was downgraded the most from its actual movie counterpart. The sharpshooter really does not translate that well here, even though I love the idea of it, and certain parts of the design just look kind of weird at this scale, like, you know, these random gold pieces that just kind of exist for some reason. But the thing is, this set is honestly still very solid for what it is. It has a ton of posability, even though it can feel a little bit awkward at times, and even though it's not as cool as the full-scale movie version, it still looks cool, at least to me. And there are some really fun things like the fish tank on the back and the propellers on the calf, so even though this is a clearly downgraded set from the movie, it's still a good set on its own. This is another one I debated whether or not to put on this list because it's in this kind of weird spot where I feel like it's more of a creature than a mech, but it also has so many similarities to a mech that it's not really gonna hurt if I count it, so why not? This set is one I haven't really changed my mind on. I think the worst part about this is the 4-legged design. It's not really so much that I don't like the idea, but it's more that it just kind of feels half-baked. I really like the torso section of this set with the trans pink in the middle and the overall armored aesthetic, and I also really like the head build, but the legs are just not good. The front ones, they look fine, but they have absolutely zero posability, and the back legs have some posability, but they have very little pieces that actually go into them, and they look kind of incomplete compared to the rest of this build. So yeah, I do actually like a lot of this set, but I also feel like this would have been improved so much if they just made it a normal mech. The Legacy Golden Mech is almost the perfect medium-sized mech. This was one of the first Ninjago mechs to have knees, which automatically makes it one of the most posable Ninjago mechs of all time. Now earlier I did say that I liked the actual look of the original Golden Mech better, and obviously I still stand by that, but for the most part this set does just everything better. The only reason I don't consider this one perfect for its scale is the arms. The arms here are technically fine, but they could be a lot better. They're designed so the elbows can only move up and down, and since this mech doesn't have any wrists, the only real option here with the sword is to just slash it straight up and down every time, or you can put the arms on this awkward angle to kind of try to slash it to the side. It also really doesn't help that the shoulder is on a ratcheted joint instead of a ball joint, because honestly, if it was on a ball joint, this problem would mostly go away. But like I said, the arms are still good enough, and this set is almost perfect for its scale. This is one of the oldest mechs on this list, but it is still one of the best. So much about the original Samurai mech is great. It has an iconic design with some really cool part usage like the trained cow textures as pauldrons and the spinner crown on the front. This set is also really similar to the Golden Mech in its scale, but it doesn't have any of the problems that that set has. Even though it does have the giant pauldrons on the arms, the CCBS joint allows the arms to move around easily and so much more freely than the design of the Golden Mech. It also does help that this set also does have waist articulation, so that's even another way to attack the Serpentine. Now, obviously the set doesn't have knees, but it does have full ankle articulation, which is just as important, so you can still get some really dynamic poses out of the legs, and this mech is small enough that it doesn't look awkward without the knees being there. There are also some smaller details I really like the jetpack on the back and the head and front cockpit sections being easy to move back to place Nia in, while also keeping her fully armored inside. This is a mech that just truly stands the test of time like no other. And now we start to get into the truly elite mechs. Jay's Titan mech is very good and actually does have a pretty interesting design, opting for an overall much thinner look and incorporating some cool features like the 2 shoulder cannons and whatever this thing is on the back of his head, which does help give this set more character. I also really like the weapons on here. It has one really big sword, which is cool, but also comes with these 2 smaller swords that can be attached to the side of the legs, which I also think is really cool and a nice look. Speaking of the legs, this is also the first big mech on this list with knees, which obviously it's good to see, but even though this mech has knees, I don't think they're really that useful because the ankles here, they can only move side to side, so you can't truly plant the foot whenever you want to bend the knees, which really does hurt the stability of the mech. This set came out just a few months ago, and I already feel like it's one of the most underrated Ninjago mechs of all time. To me, this is the best Ninjago mech of all time, at least in terms of posability. It has a very unique leg design which is based around this piston piece on the front, which allows it to fix the problem that the Jade Titan mech had by having full ankle articulation, which does result in some absolutely insane poses like this. And not only can you do those insane poses, but it's extremely easy to do it. Like I said, I think this is the most posable Ninjago mech of all time, and technically speaking, that's not actually true because there are other sets that have more points of articulation, but those sets are significantly harder to pose because pieces can easily come off and there's a ton of specific angling you have to do, which you really don't have to worry about on this set. As for the rest of it though, I think it's mostly good. The arms are the one thing that I don't love here. The Evo joints, they really don't work on a big set like this because not only does having no elbows just absolutely suck, but the piece is just way too small and thin compared to the rest of the build. The extra arms on the top are cool, but I wish both the hooks were detachable instead of just one. So yeah, this is an overall good mech with incredibly great articulation, but there are some things about it that definitely could have been improved. The Ninja Ultra Combo Mech is probably the single most creative mech on this list because of its ability to split into 4 different vehicles. But even though I'm not counting all those vehicles, it's still something that needs to be factored in when talking about this mech because it's a large part of the entire design, and that design is great. The only issues I have here is that the ankles do struggle to hold up the weight of this set and they will collapse in on themselves if you're not careful, but everything else is more than good enough, especially considering the limitations of having to make the combination feature actually work. It's honestly so impressive how they are able to make a set like this look as good as it does and function as well as it does without really having to sacrifice much to make it happen. Now I know there are some Ninjago movie haters out there, but the Fire Mech to me is such an iconic set, and it really feels to me like this was the first time that Ninjago mechs really started to get good. There's really no notable flaws in the set for me. I really like the flamethrowers, and I especially love the tubing details they did along with the tanks on the back, and just aesthetically speaking, this is a great set. One of the most underrated parts about the design for me is the way that Kai sits in the middle of it, because not only does it allow him to actually be fully armored inside the mech instead of being exposed up top like a lot of other sets, but it also makes it so the set doesn't really look awkward even though it's basically the only big Ninjago mech that doesn't have some sort of head build. Now, even though this set has definitely been surpassed by some other ones, it's still an all-time great one. The Quake Mech is the other Ninja Mech released for the Ninjago movie, and I think it's even better than the Fire Mech, and the main reason for that is the design. The unicycle style of this mech is so cool, and it's so different from any other mech we have ever seen, and I love this set for that reason. I also do really like the yellow highlights scattered throughout and the little bits of musical elements that are sprinkled into the design, like the vinyls being used to control the mech, the speakers around the cockpit, and even the flick fire missiles, which will look like speakers when they fold up. Now, obviously, this concept never made it into the show, but I really do like the idea of having pieces of the ninjas' characters being integrated into the sets beyond just their elemental powers. But once again, the uniqueness of the design is why I love this set as much as I do. Nia's Samurai X mech is kind of weird to me because it is legitimately one of the best Ninjago mechs of all time, but it also does feel kind of forgettable compared to some of the other Titan mechs. My favorite thing about the design is the giant red X in the middle of it, which is kind of ironic because when this set first got revealed, that was the part I hated about this set the most, but now I look at it as its most defining feature. There also are some cool things like the swords and the shoulder cannon, which pay homage to the original Samurai mech, and then also a head design, which I think looks really good. The articulation here is also great. The arms do essentially everything you want them to do. There are knees on this set, and even though there is an argument to be made that this was actually the first large-scale Ninjago mech to have knees, I personally would not say that because I do not think that this set is that much bigger than, say, a Jay's Titan mech, where the design would need to be drastically different. And I think it's pretty evident in the fact that both of those two sets use literally the exact same design to make the knees function. But for some other people, they would say that this is the first big mech to have it, so I think it is worth mentioning. Also, the ankles here are limited, but they're not as limited as some of the other mechs, so it's not like you can't plant the foot the moment you bend the knee. And generally speaking, from a fundamental level, everything about this set is great. But like I said, it just feels more forgettable than some of the other mechs, and I think the reason for that is even though this set is great in basically every aspect, it really doesn't do that much in terms of pushing the designs of mechs forward, or even having some standout features like Jay's Titan mech or Kalai's Chimera mech, which even though they're not as good, they do feel more memorable. But at the end of the day, not every mech needs to try to do something crazy. Sometimes it's perfectly fine to just perfect the current design and make something great, and that's exactly what this mech is, a great set. This is yet another set that changed the game because it is, in my opinion, the first Ninjago mech to have actual knees, and every Ninjago mech that has come out since has followed in his footsteps and incorporated some sort of knee design. Okay, well, at least every big mech has incorporated a knee design. But even beyond the fact that this revolutionized mech design, this set is super cool. It does a really great job upgrading the original set while still being faithful. The 3 gold plates in the middle call back to the original set. The lower legs are essentially just a bigger version of the legs on the original set, and the weapons all call back to the original as well. But there are some new and cool features like the boosters in the legs, which call back to the show, the torso section, which I absolutely love, the shoulders, which I love as well, and then little tiny details in here like the wrist design, which I think are just really well done. There's just so much here that is great from every perspective, and another one of those sets that I truly believe the only way it could possibly get better is just by being bigger. Now, I did say that Kai's Fire Mech is when Ninjago Mech started to get good, but this is the set that really took it to another level. When you think about every great LEGO mech today, regardless if it's Ninjago or another theme, this is the set that you can trace it back to because this really did change the game. There's just so much to like here, but I guess I'll start with my favorite thing, which is the legs. Even though the legs really don't have that much articulation compared to some newer mechs, I still love the way that they designed it with the gray shading throughout and some really nice color usage with the sand green and the white and the gold accents. The arms also look really nice, and they actually have great articulation everywhere, and they have some cool weapons like the sword and the saw that I absolutely love because of just how easy it is to spin. And then of course we have the torso section, which not only looks amazing, but it also integrates the wings on the back, which can be removed and turned into a flyer. This may have been the first Titan mech, but it is still without a doubt one of the best and one of the all-time great Ninjago sets. Honestly, I don't think a lot of people are going to be surprised to see it, but Cole's Titan Dragon Mech is my favorite Ninjago mech of all time. This is just an absolutely insane set from every level. Obviously, the big deal here is the articulation, which on paper is the best out of any Ninjago mech ever. It has movement literally everywhere. The waist, the arms, this shoulder joint, this hip joint, the wings, like I said, literally everywhere. But more importantly, the set once again changes the game by implementing this piston piece which allows full ankle articulation, which means the feet can fully plant on the ground, which allows some truly insane poses. I will say though, you do need to be a little bit careful when you pose this set, because there are a lot of pieces that can break off when you try to move it around, and even though they are mostly just little pieces, it is still something that's a little bit annoying and obviously not ideal when you're trying to move a set to have it kind of fall apart on you a little bit. But everything else here is truly great. From the look of the mech, to the weapons, to the overall design, this set was just made with the sole intention of being the best mech ever released, and it without a doubt achieved that goal.